Daniel's phone buzzed just as he dropped his bag onto the worn leather couch. He picked it up lazily, expecting some random notification. But the message on the screen made his stomach tighten. "I need a new car. Can you cosign?" It read. From Maya, his younger sister. A small flicker of irritation sparked inside him. It wasn't the first time she asked for help. But this felt different. Something about her casual tone implied that he should drop everything and make it happen. He sat on the couch and stared at the text, recalling the last time she had involved him in her financial troubles. It hadn't been minor. Weeks ago, Daniel had received a call from the bank, an unfamiliar number flashing on his screen. Curious, he answered, and what he heard made his chest tighten. The bank informed him that there was a missed payment on a loan taken out in his name. Daniel froze. His name. His social security number. How? The voice on the other end confirmed it. Someone had used his information without permission. It didn't take long for him to trace it back to Maya Dot when she admitted it. She didn't seem panicked. She didn't cry or beg forgiveness. She smiled nervously and shrugged, saying, "I didn't think you'd mind. You're always stable. I just needed a little help." His jaw clenched at her words. Stability. That's what she called it when she crossed boundaries, used his trust, and left him to handle the consequences. Now, weeks later, she was asking him for yet another favor, as if nothing had happened. As if the debt, the worry, the sleepless nights over calls from the bank had been erased. Daniel typed back a single line, firm and deliberate. "Keep dreaming." He hit send and felt a small sense of satisfaction. This time, he would draw a line. No more enabling. No more being her safety net while she acted as though the world owed her everything. But satisfaction was fleeting. A pang of guilt hit him almost immediately, because despite everything, he remembered the little girl who had once walked him home from school, who had shared her lunch when they had none, who had defended him when their father's temper flared. She hadn't always been like this. Something had changed. Maybe they had both changed. Maybe life had hardened her, but it didn't excuse her betrayal. Minutes passed and his phone buzzed again. Another message from Maya. "Dan, we need to talk. It wasn't I'm sorry. It wasn't I shouldn't have asked." It was a vague, ominous request, leaving Daniel to fill in the blanks. And as he stared at the words, a slow, burning realization crept over him. If she had already broken his trust once and felt justified, what else might she be hiding? The question gnawed at him, refusing to be ignored. He remembered the quiet tension in his life after discovering the loan. The sleepless nights spent calculating the damage, calling the bank, trying to repair his credit. The stress of wondering whether she would do something like this again. Each memory was sharp, like a knife turning in his mind. And with each memory, the anger grew. The desire for revenge, a feeling he had never entertained before, started to take root. Not necessarily physical revenge, but a plan to make her confront the consequences she had been avoiding. Daniel replayed the events over and over in his mind. He remembered the times she borrowed money for emergencies and never paid him back, the constant excuses, the way she twisted his empathy into her guilt. The casualness of it all had been the most infuriating. She had treated his trust as a tool, something to exploit when convenient. That latest request for a cosign, after the earlier betrayal, was like pouring salt into a wound that had barely started to heal. He thought about their childhood, how they had depended on each other, and how it had been simple once. They had shared everything. Secrets, lunches, victories, and defeats. They had been allies in a house that sometimes felt cold with their father's temper. But now, the dynamic was different. Trust had been broken, and with it, the balance of their relationship. As he sat there, staring at the phone, Daniel's mind shifted from anger to strategy. He realized that understanding the full scope of her actions was necessary before deciding what to do. He couldn't just react emotionally. He needed facts. If he was going to confront her, he wanted the truth, not the carefully constructed story she would inevitably present. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about respect, boundaries, and the pattern she had established. His pulse quickened with a mix of dread and determination. He made a mental checklist of everything he would need to uncover. The bank records, the accounts, the missed payments, the attempts she might have made elsewhere using his identity. He would know everything before he confronted her. As night fell, he paced the apartment, the shadows stretching across the walls. Each step reminded him of the stakes. This wasn't just a simple argument over money. This was a test of morality, trust, and family loyalty. He knew that confronting her without the full picture could backfire. But waiting too long could let her continue exploiting him. The clock was ticking, and the tension was unbearable. Daniel's anger and anxiety were tangled together, creating a cocktail of adrenaline that made sleep impossible. He sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a notepad, and began jotting down every instance of her crossing the line. Loans, borrowed money, favors never returned, excuses, manipulations. Each line reinforced the pattern. It wasn't isolated. It was deliberate. By the early hours of the morning, he had made a decision. He would confront her, but not recklessly. He would confront her with the evidence, with the facts, and with a moral clarity she couldn't escape. But he also knew that he had to be prepared for the emotional fallout. This confrontation could shatter what remained of their relationship. He had to weigh whether justice or revenge was worth the cost. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another message from Maya, but this time it was empty, just a heart emoji. A cruel contrast to the gravity of what was unfolding in Daniel's mind. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His resolve had solidified. He would face her, demand accountability, and if necessary, sever the patterns that had been damaging him for years. For Daniel, the betrayal was no longer just about money. It was about trust, boundaries, and self-respect. He had been pushed to the edge, forced to consider a path he had never imagined, one where he demanded consequences, where he contemplated revenge in measured, deliberate ways. He wasn't reckless, but he was no longer passive. And as he stared out the window at the waking city, Daniel knew one thing. The next conversation with Maya would change everything. It wasn't just about a car or a Cosign. It was about confronting the truths they had both avoided for too long, about revealing the cracks in their bond, and about deciding whether the ties that held them together were strong enough to survive. The reckoning to come. By the time the sun fully rose, Daniel had made a silent vow. He would not let betrayal slide this time. He would confront, he would challenge, and he would make sure Maya understood the consequences of her choices. The calm before the storm felt heavy, suffocating even, but it was necessary. Because after this, nothing would be the same, and neither would their relationship. Daniel couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, but his mind raced in circles, looping over every memory of Maya using his trust against him. Each flashback was sharper than the last. Her casual grin when she borrowed money, the way she twisted his guilt into compliance, the way she acted as if the world owed her everything. The loan she had taken in his name wasn't just a financial burden. It was proof she felt entitled to manipulate him. And now, with her message about a new car. It was clear the pattern hadn't stopped. He sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, papers scattered, his phone buzzing occasionally with Maya's texts. He ignored them. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was the time for strategy. He needed the full picture. If he was going to confront her, he couldn't rely on his memory or her version of events. He needed facts. Daniel called the bank again, speaking with the officer who had first notified him. Calmly, he asked for every account, every loan, every credit inquiry tied to his name. The officer's tone was cautious, almost hesitant. "There have been attempts," he said slowly. "2 other cards, both flagged, and a couple of small loans. None approved yet, but it looks recent." Daniel leaned back, heart racing. Attempts. That meant Maya hadn't stopped. She had been testing the limits, seeing how far she could go before he noticed. And that realization changed everything. She wasn't reckless. She was habitual. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern she had perfected. He began to write down everything. Dates, amounts, accounts, excuses she had given. Patterns of behavior, all in neat columns. Seeing it on paper, in black and white, made the betrayal feel heavier, more deliberate. The emotional weight pressed down on him. He had loved his sister. He had trusted her. And yet, here she was, pushing the same boundaries, expecting him to bail her out again. Daniel thought about how he could confront her. He didn't want to scream. He didn't want to argue. That wouldn't teach her anything. He wanted her to see the consequences of her actions clearly, without twisting them into excuses. He wanted her to feel the impact of her choices, not just hear about it. He remembered their childhood, the way they had relied on each other. They had shared everything. They had defended each other against parents, bullies, the world. But those days were gone. Now, trust had been broken. Boundaries had been crossed. And Daniel realized that to reclaim his peace, he needed to break the cycle, not just for himself but for her. He spent hours digging through online accounts, old bank statements, and emails. Each discovery added fuel to the fire inside him. There were small loans approved in her name after failed applications, all tied to him through misinformation or forgery. Each one had been narrowly caught by the bank system, but Daniel saw the potential disaster. His credit could have been ruined entirely if even one had slipped through. The more he uncovered, the more he felt his anger grow, but so did his sense of responsibility. This wasn't about petty revenge. This was about protecting himself and forcing Maya to face reality. He realized revenge could be calculated, moral even, if it prevented further harm. He didn't want to ruin her, but he wanted her to understand the gravity of her actions. By afternoon, Daniel had a plan forming. He would confront her directly with the evidence laid out. No shouting, no blaming, just facts and consequences. She needed to see clearly what she had done, how she had endangered his life, and how she needed to fix it herself. He imagined the conversation repeatedly, practicing his words, controlling the tone, imagining the reactions. His goal wasn't humiliation. It was accountability. Yet, even as he focused on the plan, doubts gnawed at him. Could he confront her and remain fair? Could he avoid letting anger turn into punishment for the sake of anger? Could he be the sibling who demanded justice without destroying the relationship entirely? These questions pressed him down, but he didn't shy away. The answers would emerge during the confrontation. Daniel also considered his own motives. Part of him wanted to see her struggle, to feel what he had felt when discovering her betrayal. That part tempted him toward revenge for revenge's sake. But he refused. He couldn't let resentment control him. He wanted justice, clarity, and change, not satisfaction from hurting her. That realization brought a strange sense of calm amidst the storm in his mind. As evening fell, he checked his phone again. Another message from Maya. Dan, please, just hear me out. The pleading tone made his stomach twist, but it also confirmed his strategy. She wasn't going to approach this honestly on her own. She needed him to hold the line, to insist on accountability. Daniel prepared for the confrontation meticulously. He printed all the documents, organized the emails, and made notes on key points to discuss. Each piece of evidence told a story of repeated deception, of trust misused, of boundaries ignored. He didn't want to lecture her. He wanted to make her face the truth without excuses. He rehearsed what he would say over and over, imagining different scenarios. Denial, her excuses, her tears, even anger. He prepared for each, reminding himself to stay calm, precise, and firm. This wasn't about him venting. It was about clarity and consequences. He wanted to guide her to understand the seriousness of her actions. Even as he planned, a part of him wondered if this confrontation would change her. Could someone who had repeatedly manipulated him truly understand? Could she finally take responsibility? That uncertainty made the night feel longer, heavier, more suffocating. He couldn't control her response. He could only control his own. The more Daniel thought, the more he realized the confrontation was as much for him as for her. He needed to reclaim his sense of safety and trust. He needed to protect himself from further manipulation. And he needed to see if the sibling he once knew still existed beneath the patterns of deception. By the time midnight passed, Daniel was exhausted, but his mind was still active, running through possibilities, planning every detail. He wasn't going to attack her. He was going to expose the truth. He wasn't going to seek revenge for spite. He was going to enforce accountability. He understood the stakes. One misstep, one uncontrolled reaction, and the situation could spiral. As he finally leaned back in his chair, the city quiet outside his window, Daniel felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The confrontation would change everything. It wouldn't be easy. It might strain their relationship permanently. But it was necessary. He had uncovered the extent of her behavior, and now she needed to confront it herself. He glanced at the papers. On the table, the documented evidence of betrayal, and felt a surge of resolve. He wasn't going to let her patterns continue. He wasn't going to let her endanger him again. And he wasn't going to let himself be consumed by anger. He would face her, demand honesty, and insist on change. And with that, Daniel finally allowed himself to rest, not sleep, but rest in preparation. The confrontation would come tomorrow. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had stepped into a new role, not as a victim, but as someone demanding fairness, responsibility, and truth. The day of the confrontation arrived. Daniel's apartment was quiet, but the tension in the air was thick enough to touch. He had prepared everything the night before: the papers, the printed statements, the notes on key points. Everything was organized, each piece of evidence telling the story of Maya's repeated betrayals. He hadn't rehearsed the words to hurt her, only to make her see the truth. When Maya arrived, she walked in confidently, as if nothing had changed. Her casual smile tried to mask the unease in her eyes, but Daniel noticed the subtle tremor in her hands. She dropped her bag on the floor and sank onto the couch across from him. "You didn't have to be rude this morning," she said softly. "I just needed help." Daniel remained calm, folding his hands on the table. He let her words hang, then placed the stack of documents in front of her. I don't want to be rude, he said evenly. I want honesty. I want you to understand what your actions have done. Maya picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. Her expression shifted from casual dismissal to shock, then guilt. I can explain, she whispered, but the confidence she tried to maintain was gone. Daniel leaned back. No explanations. No excuses. Just the truth. He waited, letting her read everything. The loans, the attempts to open credit cards, the missed payments in his name, the patterns of deception. Each piece was a mirror she couldn't look away from. Her voice trembled. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I thought you'd understand, that you'd forgive me. Her eyes, filled with fear and remorse, locked with his. Daniel felt the familiar anger stir, the old desire to make her feel the fear and helplessness he had felt. But he stopped himself. Revenge wasn't the goal. Justice was. Clarity. Accountability. He wanted her to understand consequences, not to feel humiliated. You've taken advantage of my trust for years, he said quietly. You've put my finances, my stability, at risk multiple times. I won't let it happen again. I won't cosign anything. I won't let you use my name again. And you need to fix this yourself. Maya's shoulders slumped. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't denying. She was finally facing the reality she had avoided. Tears ran down her cheeks. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Daniel took a deep breath. He could demand more. He could threaten legal action. He could push her into panic. But the moment he saw her genuinely afraid, not manipulative but scared, he realized that crushing her wouldn't solve anything. She needed guidance, not punishment. She needed to take responsibility, not have someone else force it on her. I'm not here to punish you, he said firmly. I'm here to make sure you understand what it means to take responsibility. I'm giving you a chance to fix this. If you can do it, you'll be better for it. If you can't, then I can't protect you anymore. The weight of his words settled on her. She nodded, sniffing and wiping her cheeks. I'll try. I promise. I'll pay it back. I'll fix what I can. Her voice cracked, but there was sincerity there, the kind that had been missing for years. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief, because she finally recognized the gravity of her actions. Tension, because he didn't know if she would follow through. This wasn't a guarantee of change. It was only the first step. But for now, it was enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the papers between them, the truth finally laid bare. Daniel realized that this confrontation wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about setting boundaries, reclaiming his peace, and forcing accountability. Maya's hands shook as she gathered the documents. I understand now, she said softly. I never realized how much I hurt you. Daniel nodded. You needed to see it. You need to understand that your choices affect others. I can guide you, but I won't carry the weight for you anymore. The emotional intensity of the moment left both of them drained. Daniel felt the old desire for revenge fade completely. He had wanted her to face consequences. Yes, but not to hurt her. Justice didn't have to be cruel. Accountability didn't have to be punishment. In the following days, Daniel watched cautiously as Maya began making changes. She paid down the loan she had taken in his name. She cut back on reckless spending. She even apologized to the bank, taking ownership of what she had done. It was slow, and she faltered at times, but she was trying. Daniel noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. She no longer assumed he would cover her mistakes. She thought twice before asking for favors. And most importantly, she began to acknowledge the trust she had broken, not just in words but in actions. For Daniel, the lessons were profound. Revenge might offer a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but it carried risks. It could destroy relationships, fuel anger, and leave lasting scars. Choosing accountability over revenge required strength, patience, and self-control. It was harder, but ultimately more rewarding. He reflected on their relationship. She had been a sister who had once been his ally, his protector in a harsh household. The betrayal had been devastating, but the confrontation had opened a path for real change. They could rebuild, but only if boundaries were respected and responsibility was taken seriously. Daniel realized that revenge is a double-edged sword. In the heat of betrayal, it seems satisfying to strike back, to make someone feel the pain they caused. But true strength lies in restraint, in choosing to guide rather than punish, to enforce consequences without cruelty, to demand accountability without hatred. And as he watched Maya carefully manage her finances, apologizing when necessary and taking responsibility, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Not the thrill of revenge, not the bitterness of anger, but the calm, steady knowledge that justice had been served in the most meaningful way. Through understanding and change, Daniel understood that the confrontation had been more than just about money or trust. It had been about self-respect, moral clarity, and the courage to stand firm against betrayal. He had faced a moment where he could have allowed anger to dictate his actions, but instead, he chose the path that preserved his peace and offered her the chance to change. In the end, Maya was still his sister. She had made mistakes, but she had started to take responsibility. And Daniel had proven to himself that strength isn't in revenge. Strength is in knowing when to act, how to act, and when to let go of anger to create real, lasting consequences. The experience left both of them transformed. Maya learned the importance of honesty and accountability. Daniel learned the power of restraint, the value of confronting betrayal without losing himself, and the clarity that comes from demanding consequences without cruelty. Revenge had been tempting, almost natural, but Daniel realized it was not necessary. The confrontation had been difficult, the emotions raw and heavy, but the resolution brought a peace that revenge never could. True justice had been achieved, not through punishment, but through responsibility, understanding, and the courage to face the truth. And in that moment, Daniel knew the bond they shared could survive, not because betrayal had been erased, but because honesty, accountability, and respect had been restored. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet clarity. Healing, not revenge, was the ultimate victory.